Hello and welcome to the Adaptation Planning and Practices online training brought to you by the USDA Northern Forest Climate Hub and the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. This is step 4, identifying adaptation strategies, approaches, and tactics. This video will walk you through the 4th step of the Adaptation Workbook, a resource created by and supported by the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. In prior steps, we have defined our management goals and objectives, identified local climate change impacts and how they will be exacerbated or mitigated by the particulars of our site, and assessed how these impacts may or may not change the feasibility of our original goals, adjusting them as necessary. Now, step 4, we will identify appropriate climate adaptation approaches and tactics that can help us respond to the climate-related challenges and local site vulnerabilities that climate change represents. As we work through step 4, key questions to keep in mind are: what actions can enhance the ability of the project area to adapt to anticipated changes and meet management goals? And how can these adaptation strategies minimize challenges or create opportunities for any impacted communities you may have already identified in step 2? So, after carefully setting up your project, step 4 is finally the time where you start to plan what you will actually do at your site. How will you respond to climate impacts? This can be the fun part, but for many of us, it may also feel like jumping into the deep end of a pool with all the possibilities available. Fortunately, as part of this process, we have gathered tools to help with the brainstorming process. One of those tools are adaptation menus. We use these in the adaptation workbook process to help users find strategies and approaches, and you can find these menus embedded in the online workbook or in chapters 3 and 4 of the Forest Adaptation Resources tool. The menus are curated compilations of possible actions that have been grouped to help users of the workbook find strategies that are most relevant to their projects. Benefits of the menus include helping users logically connect broader goals down to specific on-the-ground actions they can take. The menus also provide an intentional framework and a clear language with which to communicate your plans. Additionally, they're a great collection of ideas others have used. It can help boost your own creativity and planning. Just like a menu at a restaurant, you don't want to pick everything off the menu or it would be too much. You will want to use the menus to pick and choose the strategies and approaches that make the most sense for meeting your goals and objectives and which apply to your specific location. The menus are specific to topics and disciplines and are organized into a tiered hierarchy that can help narrow down your focus. While working through step 4 in the menus, it's useful to think about the available actions as somewhere on the spectrum between resistance and transition. Sometimes it may make sense to consider the ways in which your management can resist the impacts of climate change and maintain some current condition for as long as it is possible. On the other end of the spectrum, the changes coming may be significant enough that you may find it advisable to anticipate those changes and facilitate a transition at your site that changes the character or composition while still preserving some aspect of its functioning that is key to your management. Between, and to some degree overlapping with these concepts, is the idea of fostering resilience, where you may accommodate some change through your management in order to enhance your site's overall ability to cope with disturbance without changing it fundamentally. As you explore the adaptation menus, try to think about strategies and approaches that reduce impacts and maintain current conditions, and others that are forward-looking where you are intentionally facilitating change in your local project. The menus are built on an explicit hierarchy, with their specificity narrowing down from these broader adaptation options all the way to local manager-driven decisions such as actions and tactics that can be carried out. In the published version of the Forest Adaptation Resource, there are 2 menus, forestry and urban forestry. But on our website, we have menus for all of the topical areas shown here, with more on the way. As a companion to this step, we have also prepared a video that will help you understand the background and potential adaptation pathways of the tools that we will use in this step. The menus can link our real-world tactics to these adaptation options, helping us to set context and rationale for the adaptation actions we will take. Look for the link to this video in the description below. The video dives into each of these adaptations more, including examples. As you can see, there is no one answer to how to respond to climate change. The answer depends, of course, and the where and why is very important because the specifics of your project, such as site physiography and your goals and resources, may drastically change what you must adapt to and how you're able to do so. Also remember that inaction is also a decision. Step 4 is also a great time to take stock of actions you already take. This process can help you identify and refine the ways that your management may already be adaptive and how to communicate that fact. The process may also identify small changes to current management that improve the effectiveness of your adaptation. It's also possible that you will determine that there are new and different ways you need to behave, some which may even feel quite radical to your traditional management. Be open to all of them. So, now that we've identified some of the core concepts and tools for step 4, we will cover the specifics of identifying adaptation approaches and tactics that can help you meet management goals while adapting to climate change. It's also important to keep in mind the specific community impacts and opportunities you identified in step 2 and how your strategies interact with these. Once you've selected a menu or two that is appropriate for your project, you can identify an overall strategy that corresponds to one of your objectives, and then an approach within that strategy that helps address a challenge. For each approach, you will want to describe a tactic or action that you can actually carry out and be as specific as possible, answering questions like what, where, and how you will implement these actions. For example, you might be thinking about approach 2.1 in the forest menu, maintaining or improving the ability of your forest to resist pests and pathogens. So you decide an appropriate tactic is a thinning treatment to reduce density of a pest host species in order to discourage infestation based on the knowledge that current stocking levels are too high and make your forest susceptible. You would identify a time frame for this treatment and a target density that research suggests might be effective at achieving this goal. Having designed this tactic, you will want to first lay out the pros. Maybe that thinning tackles a priority pest stressor you were already worried about, or maybe it is a management action your team has done before or was already planning, making it more accessible. It's important to know why you might use this tactic. Conversely, you will want to identify what might be obstacles for this tactic. Maybe there's public opposition to harvesting in the project area, or maybe the proposed treatment will be difficult to carry out for economic reasons. Remember during this process not to limit yourself at the beginning. Be expansive and think about everything that might make sense, and then wait to limit your tactics once you've weighed the benefits and the drawbacks. Once you've thought through the pros and cons, consider if a given tactic is practicable. Does it have a good chance of accomplishing your stated goals, and does it seem likely you could really pull it off? If both answers are yes, include it. If one is no, you may need to weigh it further against other proposed tactics to see which are more deserving of inclusion. Remember throughout this process to show your work. This process and intentionality can help others you work with, and it can help you too when you refer back to the plan later on. Now we're going to look at a real-world example in how this project used the Adaptation Workbook process. The Crosby Farm Regional Park is one of the sites of the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change Network, which is a national collaborative effort to establish and monitor experimental climate change forest treatments. This ASK site, as it's called, located minutes from downtown St. Paul, represents a diversity of collaborators, users, and management goals. Managers of the site took great care in step 1 to define their goals and objectives in a way that fit the experimental needs as well as the specifics of the land and the community, as we'll explore in the next slide. The project was intentionally co-designed from the outset with buy-in from municipal, state, federal, and academic partners, as well as local community members and indigenous organizations. The park's volume of visitors make it a prime location for education and interpretive design, and managers were fortunate to partner with a local Dakota organization to create signage about the tree species present at the park, sharing the names and significance of the trees to Dakota and Ojibwe cultures. In step 2, they identified the key climate change impacts that would affect the area, and which of those impacts were most likely to affect the park in particular. Among those impacts were increased nighttime temperatures and greater variability in moisture and the severity of flooding and drought events. Step 3, they determined what some of the challenges and opportunities would be for their plan management and reassessed their original goals for feasibility. Among those challenges were the modeled loss of suitable habitat for some of the trees currently seen in the park and the impending threat of emerald ash borer. However, other trees present at the park were likely to see increased habitat, and even some species from outside of the area were projected to do well in future conditions, increasing the options for possible plantings. Arriving at step 4, they identified overarching approaches from the menus that applied to specific objectives they had already identified in step 1. These approaches, in turn, helped them step down to specific, quantifiable tactics that could be deployed in space and through time at the project site to achieve measurable outcomes. To preview step 5, which we'll cover in the following module, these quantifiable tactics in turn help lead to a robust monitoring plan that will allow the managers at Crosby Farm to identify which actions are successful at achieving their desired conditions for adaptation. This concludes step 4 of the Adaptation Workbook for the Adaptation Planning and Practices training. Please contact us for more information.